Assalamualaikum and welcome back. We're still on the topic of inventory elements for landscape resource planning. So in the previous lecture, we talked about part 1, which was the biophysical environment. So in this second lecture, we'll be going into the human community aspects in landscape resource planning. So again, this lecture was extracted from the book The Living Landscape and Ecological Approach in Landscape Planning by Frederick Steiner. In landscape resource planning, other than studying the biophysical environment, it is very crucial for us to also understand the social information, especially because all places, almost all developed places are inhabited by humans. And there are activities that occur at the places. So in acquiring social information, we may use two types of data, which are quantitative data, such as population, economic and development trends, and also qualitative data, such as perceptions and visual impacts. So some of the questions that we might ask while collecting this data and analyzing them are such as, what are the issues at the site? And then from these issues, we would identify the goals to resolve the problems. We might also look into what are the opportunities, which will then inform what are the types of data that we need to collect. So let's take Gombak district as an example. For instance, Gombak is required to address specific goals concerning housing and recreational needs. Now, when we wanted to know what sort of housing or how many types of housing needed to be provided in Gombak and how much recreational spaces will we need and where should they be located, we will need to do studies prior to doing the proposal of the plan. So some of the examples of information that we might need are the estimated future population. For example, in the next 30 years, how many people are projected to be living in Gombak? And then, where are the existing housing areas? So we may look at the existing plans or the existing land use map to identify the current housing area in order to inform or tell us where would the future housing areas be located. Next, we would need to identify and understand the characteristics of the community. Who are the people living in Gombak? What are their ages, their ethnics and races, how many percentages are the distributions between the different age groups, and so forth. And then we will also have to look into the locations and percentage of open spaces that are currently provided. And then we need to ask, is it enough? Will we need to provide more open spaces in the future to accommodate for the increasing population? And if yes, where would be the potential places to locate these recreational spaces? So social processes are connected to landscape features. As we talked about in the previous lecture, ecological processes are integral in landscape planning. And at the same time, because we are designing places inhabited by human, we must also understand the social process. So how does social process connect to landscape? We can take agricultural activities as an example. Before people wanted to identify where would be the most suitable land for them to plant paddy or even a rubber plantation, they would have to look into a combination of biophysical elements such as climate, the water conditions, and the soil characteristics. So essentially, the biophysical environment of the place would determine the suitability of agriculture and other types of development such as housing areas, commercial areas, parklands, institutionals, and where transportation networks might be located. Even deciding on housing area would require different land requirements. If we wanted to build high-rise units, it would rely on perhaps land that are not too steep and would probably have more stable conditions to accommodate for high-rise building. But on the other hand, if we wanted to plan for rural houses, it may also need different rent requirement. We might also have to consider what are the jobs of the rural residents and what are the natural resources that would be useful for the local residents, and how do you relate that to creating a place where they live. We can think that each human community must be viewed as having unique characteristics because all of us are different, and then we are distributed in different districts, different states, and different countries. And because of the background of our culture and also the geographical conditions, we would all have different needs. And that's not yet to mention the different needs by the age groups, which we'll talk about a bit later. So, for example, planning for people in Penang would be quite different than planning for people in Tanjung Malim because of the different types of ethnic and race distribution, different types of occupations, and different types of how people live and even their lifestyle and culture. So where can we get this data on social information? So luckily in Malaysia, we have a lot of online platforms that provide this data. A lot of these statistics primarily come from the Department of Statistics Malaysia or DOSM. And you can find Malaysian census data such as data Panci Penduduk dan Perumahan Malaysia from mycensus.gov.my, and also some infographics and statistics from statsgeo.mycensus.gov.my. You can also look into structure plans, local plans from the states or the local authorities, and also from other public agencies, your community, organizations, or even local libraries. So as what we can see on the image here, it shows the demographic statistics of Malaysia for the first quarter of 2020. And we can see that Malaysia's population for the first quarter of 2020 was estimated at 32.73 million. And this shows an increase of 0.6% compared to the first quarter of 2019. So now knowing that the population has increased, how then will we need to think about what we plan? Because population might keep on increasing in the future, which would represent the need to provide more resources, more open spaces, and to ensure that our planning of cities, towns, and neighborhoods are created and planned in a well-balanced manner. The statistics also show population by sex, by citizenship, by age group. It also shows the rates of live birth and death for the population of Malaysia. This is an example of rancangan tempatan daerah Muallim dan sebahagian daerah Batang Padang for 2035. So we can also source a lot of secondary data from these type of reports that have been provided by the local authorities. This data was extracted from the local plan of daerah Muallim. So it shows the profile of the residents and the breakdown of the distribution between gender, male and female, and also between the user groups, children, the active population, and the elderly. So we can see that the highest distribution or percentage goes to the active population at 64.6%, followed by children at 28.7%, and the least demographic group in Tanjung Malim are the elderly population at 6.7%. And the graph on the right side shows the projected population in the area. So we can see that the local authority have projected an increase from the year 2015 towards 2035. So this would give a great impact on how Daerah Muallim would be planned in the next few years. The next image shows natural assets or natural resources that are found in Daerah Muallim. So as it says here, the forested area in the district covers 48.50% from the overall area, So we can see that this is quite a substantial amount for a district to have almost half of its area still in green spaces. And the report identified that there are 7 hills and mountains that could be used for hiking. There are 4 forest reserves and 1 wildlife reserves. So it demonstrates how Tanjung Malim has a lot of natural resources that needs to be considered and be in well balance when planning for its future towns and neighborhoods. And in terms of water bodies, it has 2 major water bodies, which are Lembangan Sungai Bernam and Lembangan Sungai Perak, and also 6 major rivers, which are Sungai Bernam, Sungai Behrang, Sungai Slim, Sungai Trolak, Sungai Sungkai, and Sungai Bidor, going through the area. So from the examples shared just now, let's get into the rest of the inventory elements of the human community. So we shall start with the first one, which is land use map. Now, in talking about biophysical environment in previous lecture, I have mentioned about land use that also relates with the biophysical environment, because we wanted to see how the land use have shifted over time, and also what are the land use that have been proposed at the site based on the natural conditions of the area. But land use also relates to social information because it deals with people and how people use the land. So land use is both biophysical and socio-cultural environment. It relates to both of these topics. So from the map shown on the left, which is of the Daerah Tanjung Malim, we can see that the general categories of land use can be divided into residential, commercial, industrial, institutional and public amenities, open space and recreation, transportation, infrastructure and utilities, agriculture, and water bodies. Bear in mind that when we do the color coding for the land use map, we must follow the conventions of the colors used by the planning authority in Malaysia. So look into the legend to identify what color needs to be used for which types of land use. We can also study the historical timeline of land use to analyze how a place have changed over time. So this map shows the location plan of Victoria Institution from 1889 until 1929. So when we do a historical mapping of the land use, we can see not only how the site of study have changed, but how the context around it have changed also. And then we can further analyze whether it has changed the natural resources of the area. For example, in this map, you can see that there's a river which flows through the city. And then we can see over the years how a lot of the developments have taken place near to the river. In these land use categories, it shows the similar land use categories that I've explained before in the previous slide. So you can also access land use of the different districts in Malaysia from different states from iplan.townplan.gov.my. You can access it using your computer or laptop or even from your mobile phone. So the map has already indicated the types of land use in the area, and we can use this as a reference for our secondary data to do further analysis later on. So other than identifying the land use, we need to know who are the land users. So we know that in cities, there are different types of people living there, people with different job, different age, different types of economic background, educational background, different demographic profiles. You know, you have families, children, elderlies, the youth, and it's very important to know who resides in the area and what they do. So we can get this information from the census data as mentioned previously, and we might also need to conduct interviews with the local community to meet them and ask them questions Perhaps they can share with you about the history of the place and then even their perceptions and experience and maybe expectations of living in the area. And while doing this as part of our data collection or field work, we can also take photos and sketch as part of our field notes. The second inventory element in understanding the human community is understanding histories. Histories are stories of the place. They tell you about the background, what has happened, who has lived there, and what has evolved or changed over the years. A sense of history is vital in understanding a community or a region because history can give the sense of place to the area, and it also connects people to the land where they live. We can obtain information about history from interviews if we talk to the local community, or we may also do research from the local libraries because sometimes the local libraries collect newspaper articles about the histories of the site, and there may be also studies conducted about the different towns and different cities in the area collected at the library. Otherwise, we may also interview the local historian if there's one in the area. Other than the history of the place, the landscape ecological history can also tell us about the changes that have happened over time to the environment of the area. For example, this is a plan of Penang in a research done by Su Ying-Chi and other researchers. So the map shows the present distribution as of 2017 of natural habitats, reclaimed land, and artificial shoreline in Penang Island and its associated island. So if you can see on the map, the brown color indicates the reclaimed area, where the gray color indicates the urban area. Before the reclamation projects began several years back, the shoreline of Penang would only stop at the edge of the urban area. And now we can see how the land have actually increased in size because of the reclaimed area. And then we can see the red area with the dots shows the proposed reclamation area in the future. So this will show a change in the landscape ecological footprint of the land of Penang. This next map, also of Penang from the same research, shows the distribution of the aerial extent of the overall land area, of the urbanized area, reclaimed land, and mangrove forest. So you can see from the first row, the map shows the gray area, which is the urban area. Now, from 1960, you can see how the gray area is only on the northeastern side. And then as it goes to 2015, it further spread towards the inland part of the island as part of the urban expansion. For the map in the second row, you can see the brown patches only began also on the northeast side, a very small patch that has later on spread towards the southern area of Penang as the reclamation projects began to take place further. And the map on the bottom row shows the mangrove area, which is located on the western side of Penang. And we can see there's actually a slight increase of the mangrove area from 1960 to 2015. For inventory element of the human community, number 3, we will look into the population trends, characteristics, and projections. Why do we need to look into population trends when we do landscape resource planning? First of all, we need to learn how the planning area has changed over time. We might be asking, has the population grown or declined? And how will population affect the different goals of the planning? For example, if the goal of the planning was for economic development, how will we then address an increasing population? And vice versa, if the goal of the development is to provide new facilities, how will we then address the increase of population? Will more facilities need to be provided? And what kind of facilities would need to be provided? Population trends will also require us to ask what has contributed to the increase or decrease of the population, such as birth, death, or migration. We can look into this graph that shows the population trend for Tanjung Malim, that in 2015 to 2020, we can see that the graph goes upwards, which shows an increase of population. And then when we talk about the characteristics of population, it is about learning who is living in the area. We can describe this from population density and distribution, age, gender distribution, racial and ethnic distribution, and also occupation. For Tanjung Malim, we can see that in terms of its population characteristics, it is populated by 51% male and 49% female, which is almost an equal numbers of percentage. And then the distribution of the age groups is more populated by the active groups. Perhaps this would include the youth and those aged between 18 to 60, right? And the least number of population are the elderly, which stands at 6.7%. And this also shows the number of population as of 2015, which is 100,236. Then we can look into the population projection, which is to forecast who will be living in the area. Will more people live in the area due to economic development? And if the population is projected to decline, what will be the goal of planning? So in the graph here, the same thing for Tanjung Malim, we can look into how the local authority have projected for the population to keep growing after 2020 until 2035. So we can see that it is expected for the growth to have a steady increase of population, which now asks us, how will we then plan for Tanjung Malim for the next 15 years? We're going to talk about the development projections after this. So after we have analyzed the population characteristics, population trends, and population projection, we will need to look into the development projections. What has been planned for the area for the upcoming 10 years, 15 years, or even maybe 20 or 30 years. So in development projection, it is based on the population projection. We can take a simple example of providing housing area. If we know, for example, like Tanjung Malim, the population will increase in the next 15 years, we can then question whether is there enough housing areas provided for the future population. And at the same time, when the population have increased, we know that the need for recreational activities and spaces will also be in demand. So, how much open space will be needed for future recreation in the city? So, if we look at the map here for Tanjung Malim town, it shows the future locations of green spaces. So, will these green spaces be sufficient for the projected population in the future? And for example, we can see that it's only a small percentage compared to the density of the city. So how will we need to change the way we design green spaces so that the city will still be able to retain much of the needed ecological balance for the future? These maps show Kuala Lumpur's built-up and non-built-up areas in 2018. This was sourced from the draft Pelan Struktur Kuala Lumpur 2040. Okay, we can see that in 2018, there's 76.04% of built-up area, the first map on the left, that shows all the red colored areas, which shows the built-up areas in the city. Whereas the map in the middle shows the non-built-up areas, which consist of open space and forest reserve and also water bodies and undeveloped land. And this only stands at 23.96% for the land of Kuala Lumpur. And the maps on the far right shows the overlapping of the built-up area and the non-built-up area. We can see that there's less green spaces, obviously, compared to the built-up areas of the city. So in order to ensure that the green areas are still retained and well connected, the Kuala Lumpur Structure Plan 2040 has proposed Kuala Lumpur's Park Connector Network, which will include utility corridors, riverside corridors, back lanes, road and drainage reserves, and private developments. So landscape architects need to continue to become innovative and to look into opportunities of where green spaces can be included as part of the city's development, so that the growth of the city goes hand in hand with its environmental sustainability. Inventory element number 5 is economic analysis. Now I know that we are not economists, but we can use information provided by economists or those who study about the economic activities of the country to inform us on how we can plan for the place. So in aspects of economy, with regards to landscape resource planning, we would look into identifying the local economic sectors and the industry. So for instance, we need to identify what are the main source of economic income for the area, and how do we forecast and plan suitable development in the future. This map shows the economic activities of Tanjung Malim. As we know, Tanjung Malim is known for its automotive industry because we know that there are several automotive industries and factories located in Tanjung Malim. So we can see that the industrial area covers 0.43% of the overall development, and it is projected that in 2035, it will only need another 0.12%. This is because the current planning has been expected to be sufficient to accommodate for future growth. And the zoning of the industrial area in the overall would occupy 1,279.53 hectares of the overall area. We can see from the map, the dots in red shows the proposed development for new industry, where the dots in light purple or pink there shows the proposal for development or improvement of the existing industrial area. And the land use they are in purple shows the current industrial areas. The last one is on doing an inventory on the user groups. When we study the user groups, we need to identify who the users of the place are and who will be impacted by the proposed project or planning. For example, a community may be seeking to preserve a park, a wetland, or historic site. So in this case, it's important to know who are the current users of the place and who might be the new users of the place. Because although you have same function of a place such as a park, but people might use the place in various ways. This data shows the current population estimates of Malaysia in 2019. We can see the data on the right shows the population of people aged 60 years and over, which has increased by 0.3% from 2018 to 2019. Although this shows a slight increase, but the trend might be inclining in the next 15 years. So this would pose landscape architects and landscape planners a question. How will we design a city or a neighborhood for the aging population? We can also see from the population by age group that those between 0 to 14 years in 2019 is 23.3%, which has decreased very slightly from 2018. And then we can see that the population for the age group 15 until 64 years in 2019 is 70%, which is a slight increase from 2018, which was 69.7%. And then the population for those aged 65 and above in 2019 was 6.7%, an increase from 2018. So we can see that the aging population will continue to be part of the population. And because of better healthcare and people are taking of their health in a better way, so the age span might be longer, and people will need facilities to accommodate the different age groups. So what are the users' activities and where do they do the activities? So if we look into the different age groups, we can start to think of how they use the outdoor spaces and what do we need to provide to accommodate their own needs. If we take children versus youth, they might have different capabilities, different needs, and different preferences. So we can start by studying about them or even interviewing and asking them what their needs are and how they view the landscape as a place for them to do recreation or maybe as a place for them to relax or even learn. And then we can also map the areas that are important to them so that we can identify what are the potential places that can be improved further or proposed to be something new. So we have covered 6 inventory elements of the human community. Now let's recap. Number 1, land use maps. 2, histories. 3, population trends, characteristics and projections. 4, development projections. 5, economic analysis. And 6, user groups. So in the next series of lectures, we will look into how we will then analyze the biophysical environment with the human community aspects and conduct suitability analysis to find out how we might propose different plans for a place. So this is the end for the topic of inventory elements for landscape resource planning. I look forward to seeing you in the next lecture on analysis and suitability mapping. Thank you.